And you've just heard Heart Against the Wall, the new single by Gurry Wurry. And I'm delighted to be joined by the man behind Gurry Wurry, Dave King. Hello, Dave.
How's it going?
Yeah, really good, really good. So, talk a little bit about the single, because it's the first release of this year, isn't it, Rory?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I think it's hopefully a bit of a new sound compared to the last time. I had maybe 6 months between finishing the last one and making something new. So I put a fair bit of effort into trying to be more concise. I feel like looking back at the first album, the songs were all a bit long, maybe and a wee bit. I feel like I was probably trying to hide the singing a wee bit as well. I was double tracking everything, and so this time I've tried to be a lot more, a lot sharper, a lot more concise. There's only one vocal kind of lead track. It's hopefully a little bit of a different sound. We'll see what people think.
It's interesting. I thought I never thought about the length of the tracks on the last album, but what I thought was it was really, you know, you gave them time to breathe in that sense. There was no well, we have to kind of get this finished in 3 minutes and 30 seconds, which I think perhaps used to be a consideration. I don't know if it is as much now.
Yeah, that's right. I think people are pretty open now. You get quite a lot of, particularly within that sort of jazz funk kind of crowd that's become quite popular again. There's a lot of like 7, 8, 9, 10 minute songs going on there that people seem to be totally fine with. But I kind of felt like it would be quite a nice challenge to set yourself to never get over 3 minutes. I didn't manage it. Quite a lot of them are more like 4 minutes, but they're a bit sharper, a little bit sharper.
And so this is the first single from an album which is coming up, I'm taking.
Yes. Yeah, it is. I've got a whole load of 11 tracks this time. I was very lucky to get Creative Scotland support. So I think it's a decent step up from last time I worked with Rod Jones, Rod from Idlewild and Hamish Hawk and all that kind of stuff. So I still did all the music at home, recorded everything in the living room here, and then he's just down the road in Leith as well, just round the corner. So went to him, did all the vocals there, which was, yeah, it was probably quite daunting, I suppose, because the previous one I did everything at home.
Yeah.
So you've got your own comfort, your own time. You can take as long as you like and just mess about. And it was quite interesting going in with a finite amount of time with someone much slicker than yourself to like you've got to nail this.
That's interesting because there's time kind of come up in both your answers there. And do you think maybe having that set time in a studio, which you didn't have before, has actually affected the songs as well?
Yeah, I think so. Well, there was a thing that happened that I didn't expect to happen, but I suppose when I applied for the Creative Scotland funding, I just didn't, being naturally probably a bit of a pessimist, I didn't expect it to happen. So when that came in, suddenly it was like, oh man, I've got to do this. I've got to nail this. So every single day from the day the funding decision came in till the day I went in the studio, I practiced the full set and I had the lyrics sat out, I had a music stand in the middle of the living room, played the backing track and just sang it over and over again. So I reckon by the time I went in the studio, I'd probably sang them 100 times each or something like that. Whereas the previous album, it was in my living room on my own. So a lot of those were probably the first or second take, or, they were quite, it was kind of just happening. You were creating it as it went. And I think something happens when you sing a song 100 times that I hadn't really appreciated before. You get inside it a lot more and you kind of know where it's going and you just get more confident in it. Even lyrics were changing at times. And I think just the act of having to do that, because I didn't want to embarrass myself going in the studio. I didn't want to turn up and be like fluffing everything. I thought I need to be half decent here. I've never been that confident in my singing, so I knew that was going to be an issue. But it felt pretty good to be practiced. I remember the first time we went in, first take, I was like, that felt quite good. I didn't mess anything up there. Like, I mean, it's not Celine Dion, but it's
But it's interesting. It almost sounds like you've been doing a lot of training before you went for the big match, if you like, for the.
absolutely. And see, before I wrote anything, it has been a real training year. Before I did anything this time, I decided I wanted to be hookier, I wanted to be sharper. So I made a playlist of my favorite pop songs. And I've always been quite bad for being quite obsessed with production. I like the way things sound.
Mm-hmm.
And if a song is really hooky, but the production's, just awful, I tend to it's dead to me. I don't listen. So this playlist is explicitly production agnostic. It doesn't matter how glistening and horrible the production is. If the hook is good, it makes the playlist. And then I put it on random, and every night I'd sing along for about an hour. So it would pick out maybe 20, between 12 and 20 random pop hits. So I felt like a few months of doing that and doing singing practice, it just felt like I was kind of in a bit more of a groove. Like I had some, I don't know, it seemed to work. I certainly enjoyed it anyway. I don't know what my neighbors thought of me belting out like
Same song.
Aztec Camera and Britney Spears and all sorts of stuff. Like
Is that a publicly available playlist, or is it just
it,
private?
it actually is probably, I've not shared it with anyone, but it is there.
Well,
It's
I'm going to check that out because it sounds right up my street, and I've been really interested to see what songs you've got on it.
it's called Harder Hooks Than Tyson. And
Brilliant.
I think it's honestly genuinely about a day long. I think it's about 24 hours worth because anytime, and because I'm completely production agnostic with it, I can be in Tesco and hear something absolutely dreadful, but it's really catchy. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm going to put that on. I like the way that that vocal works. It's been quite liberating. It's also one that you definitely dance along to as you're going. It's got that catchiness to it.
Oh, brilliant. I'll check that out. And you mentioned funding there, and I often wonder what funding does for an artist. Does it kind of give you the ability to go and work with other people that you might not previously? Does it give you a kind of personal kind of lift to say, oh yeah, here's other people that believe in what I'm doing? How does it kind of
Yeah,
manifest?
definitely both. So, I mean, on a practical level, if I had to pay for it all myself, I'd be making it in my living room again.
Yeah.
And I got a guy called Ali Kelly who did a really good job of mixing the first one. So you're still with your own funds, you're able to take it a bit further than I would have on my own. But I wouldn't have been able to go into the studio and work with someone like Rod and get proper studio vocal recordings, proper studio mixing, and kind of just on a pure practical technical level, that it enabled me to go and work with someone really good. And he's obviously given me lots of advice on like the release schedule and all of that sort of stuff as well, just working with him. And
Yeah.
I mean, on the first day I was in the studio, Hamish Hawk was cutting about, working on a new tune in the corner, and it's just a good atmosphere. It kind of lifts you a lot. You feel like, right, this is real. Like it's not just messing about in your bedroom. So it gives you that lift. But then I think the other side is just getting the thumbs up when you know that it's difficult to get the funding. It's quite competitive to get that thumbs up. It did feel like, oh, someone actually obviously doesn't mind the stuff that I made before and thinks
Yeah.
this might have some potential. So that felt good. And then I think the last part for me definitely was a sort of accountability thing. Once somebody said, lottery players cash is coming your way, you've got to actually, you're going into the studio, you're like, right, this better be decent. Like I
Yeah.
need to practice every day and I'm not going to blow this. And you just feel so guilty, I think, if you blew that. And like, so I think that helped, that accountability, that pressure on you to like go and make it better. That felt pretty good actually.
Yeah, kind of feeling a responsibility that
Yeah.
people are, that's really interesting. But I mean, the last album was critically acclaimed. People really liked it. There was it had a lot of end of year lists and a lot of tracks played.
Yeah, it did. It did a lot better than I thought it would because that was a total standing start. I hadn't made any music for 10, 15 years, and that
Yeah,
was just kind of all made on my own in here. Didn't have any contacts, so everybody I sent it out to was sending it cold. That was the first time I'd ever sent emails to these people. I didn't. I kind of expected people to just bin the email. People are busy, so it was quite nice. I mean, Vic was the first person that actually got back to me, which was insane because I kind of had him as like, he's kind of your top dog for that sort of music in Scotland.
yeah,
He replied to me honestly about 15 minutes after I sent him the email. It must have just caught him at the exact right time. And he's just listened to it and pinged a note back saying, I quite like that. I'll probably give that a play. And you would that from then on, I was like, oh, this might be legit. I better send this to as many people as I can. And like, you know, obviously it didn't like set the heather on fire. It was pretty low key, but the people who heard it seemed to get some nice feedback and that it was good.
yeah. I think the people that liked it really loved it. That's the feeling. I was having a chat with people out at gigs and stuff like that. A lot of people, were talking about it in their, favorite records of the year, things like that. And how you've mentioned a little bit that before you just did it all in your living room, and now are you collaborating in terms of songwriting or music with anyone apart from your producer?
No, so I
Still
still,
you, basically.
yeah, I still did every note played on there is me. Actually, on the first one, Nick played saxophone, so she plays for a band called Nightcaller, and she played sax on maybe 3 tracks or something like that, and that worked pretty well. But the only problem is it's quite tough to record the sax in the flat without. I didn't have super production know-how as well, so it was a bit hard to get that to sit in the sound. So this time I just created everything myself, which it also, actually, I never mentioned that the other thing that changed with the process. So on the first album, there were 10 songs, and I wrote 10 songs for the first album. Those were all the songs I had, and it was like, okay, that's finished. This time there's 11 songs, and I think I wrote 35.
Oh, okay.
There was a lot more, and I actually basically finished them all. They didn't all have proper lyrics. Some of them were just nonsense, filling in the gaps. But I had 35 full tracks, and then I let 5 or 6 people hear them all and pick out what was jumping out to them. And then I tried to listen over and over again. They sat for a couple of months so you could get a bit more objective and then come back and listen. So that was quite a fun process. It feels like I definitely did a lot more this time round than the first time.
And I don't think we've mentioned when the album's coming out. Do you have a date for that?
So yeah, it should be end of the year. I think probably September-ish. I was looking August, September, but August is obviously not a great time to release anything in Scotland, with the festival kind of felt like it was taken over. So I think it'll be early September, with a good few singles to follow, in advance of that, not to follow.
You mentioned Rod talking about a release schedule, and is that something that is also something kind of new, the kind of planning of these things?
Yeah. So to be fair, I blew the first one just out of total inexperience. I chucked the whole album up, and that was it. And what I've learned since is, which I really didn't know. I mean, Spotify and that didn't exist when I was last making music. But effectively, no one is interested in music that's already released. So to get on a lot of these Spotify playlists, to get any sort of real traction in any of those places, it needs to be new. So you kind of need single 6 weeks, single 6 weeks, single, so that there's constantly new things and they're stacking on top in this sort of waterfall release way. And then the album comes at the end. Whereas I just thought, well, I've made an album, so I'll put an album out, put it out, and then that was it. And then the other thing I never really thought about, see, when you've then got to promote that for a few months, you have to keep making stuff up. You're like, well, which song will I promote now? There was a point where I had, there was great people, including yourself, supported it, and people were adding it to podcasts and playlists and radio shows, but it was all different songs.
Yeah.
So I was putting out, like, one day I was like, oh, Ali's added Blood to this place. And then the next day it'd be, oh, someone's added Coming Down to this place. And looking back, I now realize that was a mess. Like, I don't know what I thought I was doing there, but obviously I just had no idea. I was just trying to promote as much as you could. This way, I suppose it's like there's a 6-week block where we talk about this song, try and promote that, then a 6-week block we try and promote the next, and each time hopefully building on the last. We'll see if it works. It might get to the same small amount of people. Who knows? But it's worth a bash.
It's interesting the way that streaming in particular has changed the way that records, are released. I think, some people put EPs out and release a track a week until the full EP's out. And, I don't think there's any particularly right or wrong way of doing it, but it is interesting that people are really considering how it's done, rather, as you say, than just, oh, I've made a record and I put it out and hopefully folk will like it.
Yeah, you even seem to see people making singles over the course of practically 2 years before they release anything with more than a couple of tracks on it. And then sometimes the album is all those singles. They've almost made like a greatest hits at the end of 2 years.
Yeah.
I never quite know with some of those releases, did they have it all to start with and they're slowly tripping it out, or is it more organic? I'm not sure. Because I guess that would be the upside of that streaming thing, is you don't have to make a huge project. You can make one track, get it right, experiment a bit, make something else.
Yeah, but I still think there is a desire for an album coming out that you've maybe heard a few tracks off it and you've liked it, but there's something brand new that you've not heard before when it does come out. That's maybe a personal thing, but that almost older fashioned way of doing it.
Yeah, I'm the same, absolutely. And I mean, there's feels like I don't know, maybe it's just, maybe it is just my own personal opinion. If I turn my thing around, you'll see, I've
Plenty
got
of vinyl.
walls of records, and that's how I listen to music most of the time. I use Spotify to find new things, and I'll hear a song or two and quite like it, add it to a playlist. It's good for making playlists to practice along with or whatever. But in terms of actually sitting and enjoying music, I like to listen to an album, and it
Ab-
feels like I feel like an album's maybe coming back. Feels like
Mhm.
there's a lot of people released really good albums over the last 4 or 5 years that, you know, a lot of people talked about the album being dead and it being singles or EPs, but I don't buy into that at all. I feel like there is a lot of really good albums coming out now.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Often they're linked to physical releases as well, whether it's CD or vinyl or something like that. I think people are still a bit wary of, just buying it digitally. I don't know, but I think there is still that desire to have them. Definitely, definitely there
Yeah.
is. Yeah. And I was reading the press kit before you mentioned putting together a playlist, and it's interesting because it mentions a few artists: Randy Newman, Beta Band, Steely Dan, Kraftwerk, John Martin, Thelonious Monk. And I'm interested in how you approach that and I mean, you've mentioned it's a crowded market and you've really got to try and grab attention, haven't you? And is
Yeah.
that kind of how you do it? I was talking to another musician about this a while ago, and they say, oh, we almost make something up. It's can't remember a good example, but power pop through the prism of, strawberry jam or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
And because there's a lot of press kits get sent out, it is a really crowded market. And it was interesting reading yours. I went, oh, I like them, I like them, I like them. And it does kind of help, I think, if you can kind of grab attention that way. But how much do you consider that when you're putting these things together?
Yeah, I put quite a lot of effort into it this time. I had the benefit of a year or so of people hearing other music, and I think it is quite hard to do it yourself, to think like these are the artists I listen to, and this is why it sounds like them. You know, I listen to hundreds, thousands of artists. You know,
Yeah,
it's
sure.
really hard to pinpoint which ones are actually coming through in the music. But there were names people were saying, you know, it was Vic that first said Randy Newman, and he said kind of a mix of Randy Newman and Gorky's. So there was that sort of, I say modern, Gorky's are probably 20, 30 years old now, but you know what I mean? That
Yes.
more modern alt pop, and then that classic kind of songwriting thing, I guess. But even the classic songwriting, you know, Randy Newman's quite playful, I guess, in the way he puts songs together. And then straight away went into the studio with Rod, and he hadn't spoken to Vic about that, but he had said to me, he was like, "Oh, the Randy Newman thing, I can totally hear that. There's like a playfulness in the instruments there." And it was him that mentioned Steely Dan. And it was funny because I've only got into them quite recently, probably later than a lot of the music was written. But I've kind of become obsessed with them in the last couple of months now that it's all finished. And once he mentioned it, I was like, oh, there's so much there. And then that opens a whole other world of like, when you find out like I'm now in 10cc and stuff like that. And there's stuff that I probably used to think was not cool. So
Yeah.
when you were younger, you didn't listen to it, and then suddenly you're like, you know, looking back at my dad's record collection and some of the ones that you gave away, you're like, yeah, probably should have kept a hold of that one. You're buying them back now, like, um, but so I suppose there was all of that. Trying to think of the real artists that people had mentioned that, oh well, if people are mentioning that, I might as well put that in because it's a good shortcut.
Yeah.
But then I was also trying to find like a vibe, a way of describing it, like your kind of prism thing of
Yeah.
like you need some sort of thing. So I was talking to a few people, and my mate Danny, he's the singer in Nightcaller, and we were kind of talking about it having a really kind of lazy vibe. I think
Yeah.
everyone's quite slow. It's quite relaxed, even when there's maybe tension or there's quite a lot of dissonance in it. It's always quite a lazy tension that then kind of it's got that warm enveloping thing. So we started thinking about it in terms of like painkillers or post-operation kind of world. So then that's where the anesthetic alt pop thing came from. It was like, oh, that kind of works. I think that makes sense. It's something I hadn't heard someone say. So I was like, okay, let's do that because no one else is saying that. Um,
Yeah, a slight kind of wooziness to everything that's going on. Yeah.
yeah,
But when I was reading the press list, I did think it sounded kind of American West Coast. And I think that's to do with it, that relaxed feel about things, and people might just play for, even bands like Little Feet going way, way back, they just
yeah.
keep on playing and jamming, and that it's got that kind of feel about it.
Yeah, and it's definitely written that way. You know, even though I tried to be more concise, get the songs down to 3, 4 minutes, try and make them, you know, quite accessible tunes. If I'm writing guitar parts or whatever, or keys parts, I just stick the thing on loop and sometimes play for an hour or 2 hours of just messing about on top. And then I'll listen back and be, oh, I quite like that wee bit or that wee bit. there's one whole song on the album that's like a ballad type thing that there is no way I could ever play again. It's just a kind of like quite a jazzy piano ballad, and it was just 100% made up. It was just an improvised thing, and I listened back to it. I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't realize that was me playing that. That sounds like an actual piano player. Let's take that part and just chuck that in. So there's kind of it's definitely got a bit of a jammy feel to it, I think. I also quite like trying to ruin songs. That's a bit of a thing that I've really enjoyed doing. If you get something quite sweet sounding and then put like just a guitar note that does not fit
I
and just
noticed that on the single, isn't it? There's a couple of
yeah.
times you go, there's, whoa, what's that happened? What just happened there? So I totally gonna get that, yeah.
I made Rod laugh with some of those. That I think this one in particular, this the Heart Against the Wall single, when it gets towards the bit at the end, he was like, "That is just deliberately obnoxious." It's just one big note that I was like, once you hit it, it's just I don't know. I love the sound of that. I think my ears have always been drawn to that, and that's my excuse for why I'm not a very good singer. I'm not very good at staying in tune. I've always been drawn to this stuff that's just a bit off, like Captain Beefheart and Tom Waits and Annette Peacock and all of the kind of like it's just slightly crunchy, weird. Even like Thelonious Monk. I like a lot of different jazz, but I like his in particular, where it's like crunchy notes that you're like, oh, I didn't expect those ones to go together, but there's something quite satisfying about them.
I think the vocal on the single anyway, really, it's the strongest. I think I've heard your voice. It really stands out. As you know, there's no doubt. Honestly, no, I know who that is singing.
Oh, that's great. That's good to hear because that'll be you'll be the first person to have really heard it and given me any feedback on it who I don't, who's not
Yeah,
like a close pal who's just going to tell you, oh, that sounds great. So
yeah,
it's kind of yeah, that's cool. That's nice to hear. It was something Rod was he was quite particular about the way of producing the vocals because I had gone in thinking we would double track it all again and would kind of hide it and mush it. And he was like, I think you need to be more exposed.
yeah.
I think we want you close to the mic, really up front in the mix. And straight away I was like, are you sure about that? That was a bit of a panic. But see, once he got one track going and he kind of, you get the right sound on it because there's not even that much reverb on it. It's quite a dry vocal, quite up front, and then it was kind of like it didn't take too long before I think just once, someone with his experience, once he's like, nah, trust me, it's working, you were like, cool, I'm gonna go with this. I think this is
Yeah.
fun. And you just get into it. But it was a wee bit daunting at first because I quite like to hide my vocal. That was definitely the old plan, was like bury that, play as much as you can over the top of that.
I think it really works up front, as you say. That's interesting. I think you've got to trust your producer, haven't you, in that sense?
Yeah.
And I've never asked this, but where does the name come from?
So it's a Scots word, an old Scots word for like. So there seem to be a few different meanings. It's kind of I think it could be a synonym for like a stramash, a mess, a big, a bit of a rammy going on. I've heard it used as like a dog's bark or a big fight, a brawl. So I like the idea of it being a mess and something quite abrasive,
Yeah,
but actually it's really fun to say. Like it just rhymes, Gurry
it
Wurry.
is.
It rolls off the tongue. It sounds quite soft, I think, even though the meaning was quite hard, which I like that juxtaposition thing of like fun, but also a bit like dissonant, and it's going to be a bit messy. So, and I think the word woozy has always been around since I started making this music a couple of years ago. So something that had almost the same letters in as that, I felt
Yeah.
like that's probably the right kind of vibe. I went through quite a lot of potential names. I knew I didn't want to use my own name because it's just a boring name. Um, and then, I feel like who's releasing music called Dave these days, except from the Dave, like he's taken that. So I was like, I need something more interesting. But I remember we had ones around like Roadworks was one. The idea of, I wanted something where it sounded like something was going wrong.
Uh-huh.
I knew from early doors, this music's going to sound like something's going wrong. Um, but I couldn't quite get anything. Roadworks felt too harsh with the K and stuff. It just felt like too strong. It needed to be softer. And then I'm a sucker for things that rhyme. So it kind of, once I saw it in the Scots dictionary, I was like, oh, that's it. That's the one.
Oh, it's a great name. As you say, it's great to say, and it absolutely stands out. Are you planning to do any live shows? Is that something you're thinking about?
So it's interesting. I had zero plans for that. I think coming back to the sort of confidence of the comfort of making it in your own house, I thought this is definitely studio project, Steely Dan style, never taking this out. And then Vic asked me to do his club, so I think it'll be a couple of days ago by the time people hear this, but we'll see how that goes. So I suppose the answer right now is maybe. I've bought a drum machine. I've figured out arrangements for the songs because I didn't even know the chords for the songs. You know, I recorded a lot quite a while ago. All I'd been working on was the vocal for a while. So I've had to rework out all the chords, make arrangements that work solo, suddenly try and make sure, can I sing that rhythm while playing that rhythm? Because some of them are there's quite a sort of funk kind of jazz looseness to a lot of it, which I think I've just about got down. And then it's trying to control a drum machine with a pedal with your feet at the same time. It's all getting a bit Mr. Boom, if you remember him, the kind of one-man band. Yeah. So I've not got the hi-hat hat yet, but you know, maybe for the second gig. But I don't know. I'm kind of fancying it. I'm quite up for it. So if this one goes well, I might do more. There's something quite annoying about gigging with keys though. They're just so huge to carry around. But it could be fun. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, you don't see many one-man bands these days. That's true. They seem to be a dying species.
I know. I'd really love to have a band together. I think a lot of the songs, you know, there's like an interweaving of parts. I think it would be really fun to do it with a proper band, but that might take a while to find the right people and get it going, but we'll see.
Well, if your plans do expand to playing other gigs, let me know because I'd love to be there and hear it.
Yeah, definitely.
Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been really enjoyable.
Yeah, it's been super fun. I mean, thanks very much for having us. And again, for the support on the first one. It's really appreciated. It's just nice to know there's people out there listening to lots of new stuff and sharing it all. And yeah, it's really cool.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And this is Gurry Wurry and Coming Down.